Donald Trump's voter fraud commission, or what I like to think of as the fraudulent voting commission, is still pushing forward on its quest to do two things: to suppress American voting in as many ways as possible, and on the other hand, to make Donald Trump feel better about losing the popular vote. And this week, it had its first big meeting where the members of the commission came together and talked about what some of their goals were when it comes to investigating this mythical voter fraud that they think is going on across the country. And so we've got a couple of videos we want to show you. First, we've got the vice president making clear what his objective is in all this.
You know, it's the greatest privilege of my life to serve as vice president to a president who cares so deeply about the integrity of America's elections and the right of each and every American to see the sanctity of their vote protected.
It is impressive that Mike Pence can keep his hair so glisteningly, purely white when he just gets his face in Donald Trump's ass cheeks and just goes to town there. But it still just stays pristine. It's like an Arctic slope.
Oh God, that was imagery that I did not need.
But anyway, he's overjoyed because Donald Trump wants to protect the vote. That's what he wants. That's why he would choose someone like Kobach. We'll return to his record to be in charge of this thing. But there he was talking about Donald Trump. Why don't we go to a little bit of Donald Trump and he will make clear what some of his priorities are.
This issue is very important to me because throughout the campaign, and even after it, people would come up to me and express their concerns about voter inconsistencies and irregularities, which they saw. In some cases having to do with very large numbers of people in certain states.
So I always find it really interesting how whenever there's a negative article written about Donald Trump or his administration, sometimes there will be some anonymous sources, members of the administration or people in the White House who speak out against him and talk to reporters, and they're angry about that. Like, how dare you? We need to be specific about who these sources are. But when it comes to anything Trump says, he's never specific. Yeah. So, okay, who are these people who come to you and they claim that they experienced or saw firsthand that there's been voter fraud? There is no voter fraud. Study after study indicates that there is no voter fraud. So why is it that Trump is so up in arms about this issue, which doesn't really seem to be an issue at all? It's because he can't handle the fact, he and his ridiculous ego cannot handle the fact that millions more voted for his opponent, right? And so he like obsesses over this and wants to prove so badly that no, I won the popular vote along with the Electoral College. Like, no, you didn't win the popular vote. There aren't millions of people who are illegally voting in the country. You have no evidence of that. You've provided no evidence of that. You just say things without providing evidence or without being specific. And right now, we literally have this assault on Americans' voting rights and this, intimidation campaign where this ridiculous commission is going to secretaries of state and asking for private information or voter information, I should say, so
some
they
of
can
it is
just
private. And some of Social Security numbers and
exactly last 4 digits of Social Security numbers, just information that they would put out there and publish so hackers can get their hands on it and do whatever they please. I mean, it's ridiculous, and regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you should be concerned about what they're doing.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you brought up that particular attempt to gather up all of this information. A lot of people were extremely and I think justifiably worried about that. And Donald Trump thinks the reaction from the states, that's what we should be worried about. He's gonna go on that here.
If any state does not want to share this information, one has to wonder what they're worried about. And I asked the vice president, I asked the commission, what are they worried about? There's something, there always is.
I'm actually, why don't you release your tax returns? Why won't you release your tax returns?
What are you worried about, Donald Trump? What are you worried about?
What's the big deal? Why don't you release those returns? Why is it that members of your administration didn't disclose these meetings with Russians? I mean, what are they worried about? Why didn't they disclose it if there wasn't any collusion going on?
This only applies to voter fraud.
No, I know. He is not transparent at all, and he has the audacity to say that these officials in these states who are protecting their voters are the bad guys because they have something to hide. No, they refuse to give in to your ridiculous ego fest where you can't handle the fact that millions more voted for your opponent, okay? You still won the election, you still have the opportunity to destroy this country and the world if you wanted to, right? And so just be happy about that.
Yeah.
Like, move on with your life.
For the most part, Donald Trump's personal sort of investment in this commission does have to do with his fears about being seen to be a loser in the popular vote. But that's not the part that I'm most worried about, of course, as I wasn't just joking in the beginning that it really is about those two things, his personal feelings and ego, but also about the voter suppression. And when it comes to that component, Donald Trump is not the person you need to be worried about, and Mike Pence isn't really the person you need to be worried about. There is a third person, and that is Kris Kobach, and you're gonna see him in this clip.
Individual states from time to time may have investigated specific allegations of voter fraud or have done some specific investigation of voter fraud. For example, in my state of Kansas, we're engaged in litigation right now defending our proof of citizenship requirements at the time of registration. And we've engaged in extensive fact-finding for the federal courts involved and have discovered 128 specific cases of non-citizens who either registered to vote or attempted to register to vote. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. One expert in the case estimated that the total number could be in excess of 18,000 on our voter rolls.
So Kris Kobach is one of perhaps the biggest liars in the entire country. His only objective as a human being is to stop as many Americans from voting as humanly possible, and he will lie brazenly to accomplish that. Kris Kobach was in a position that if there was voter fraud, actual voter fraud in his state, he was the Secretary of State, but he wasn't just the Secretary of State. In this particular area, he was a super Secretary of State because he alone amongst all the Secretaries of State across the country could actually bring charges against people who committed various forms of voter fraud. And with all of that power and all of this personal investment in tracking this down, he brought charges successfully against one person. Now, I love the concept that every vote is sacred and every vote can change the world, but I think it's exaggerating to say that his ability to find one person who broke the law is proof that we need a nationwide commission to drastically change the way America votes that is likely to disenfranchise literally hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans. So in his extended comments, Kobach talked about some of the things that you can expect out of this commission in very nice language, like accuracy of voter rolls, vote fraud, voting by mail, which is a big fear, cybersecurity and voter intimidation. And you might think, well, look, those sound like things that we should look into if you've been sort of at least passively affected by right-wing propaganda when it comes to voter fraud. But you should understand the history of Kobach. Kobach is famous for his crusade against the mobile voter program and has been sued at least 3 times for trying to make it harder to vote in his state of Kansas. The most recent concern was that he illegally blocked tens of thousands from registering before the 2016 election. And he didn't just do it in Kansas. He literally has gone around the country helping to pass state level laws to make it harder to vote in a number of different ways. Also getting involved in things like the Arizona Papers, Please law, which isn't directly necessarily voted, but he just really wanted to give the middle finger to those people. And so he's the person you need to worry about. We don't know exactly what they're gonna do to disenfranchise Americans on a mass scale, but we know what his goal is, we know what his track record is, and now he has a federal mandate to do this to the entire country.
Right, and also keep in mind that this is really about a political party that understands and realizes that their constant support for corporate interests and their inability or their negligence in representing the American people is working against them, right? And so since they know that they can't get the votes that they need to stay in office the right way, right, by maintaining our democratic process, they've decided that they'll do things like redistricting or passing ridiculous voter ID laws that, oh, what a coinkydink. They specifically impact people who lean Democrat and vote for Democratic candidates. They would rather cheat than represent the American people. And that's what's really going on right now. And this whole notion of them collecting all of this private information on American voters is part of an intimidation campaign. And I applaud these secretaries of state that are saying, no, we're not giving into it. And by the way, these are not just Democrats, these are Republicans as well. And I think that it takes principle and strength to do that, to stand up to this commission, and I'm glad that they're doing it.
TYT membership gets you commercial-free Young Turks. Download it, stream it, podcast it, get all the network shows, and support independent media. TYTnetwork.com/join.